In September 2005, a line of aircraft sat motionless under the heat at Basa Air Base. Ground crews moved quietly, not with urgency, but with finality. The last Philippine fighter jets were about to be retired. There would be no immediate replacement. For the first time in decades, a nation would step away from defending its own airspace with fast jets, and no one present could say when that capability would return. The pilots gathered that morning understood the weight of the moment without needing it explained. Many had spent their entire careers flying the same aircraft now scheduled for retirement. The mood was restrained. No speeches attempted to dramatize the occasion. Procedures were followed, signatures completed, and systems powered down. What remained was a silence shaped by routine, not ceremony, as if continuity had simply paused. For more than 40 years, the fighter force had been anchored by a single platform. The aircraft were not new, and they were not the most advanced in the region, but they were dependable. They had formed the backbone of air defense, training generations of pilots and technicians. Their withdrawal did not just remove machines from service. It removed a structure that had defined operational identity for decades. The history of that structure reached back to a much earlier period. In December 1941, before independence, Filipino pilots had flown limited and aging aircraft against a rapidly advancing force. One of them, Cesar Basa, did not return from a mission over southern Luzon. His loss became part of institutional memory, not as a symbol of defeat, but as an early marker of a developing air service learning under difficult conditions. After the war, the effort to build an air arm began again, this time with more deliberate planning. By 1947, a small group of officers and enlisted personnel arrived at what would become Basa Air Base. Equipment was limited, and much of it came from surplus stocks. The challenge was not only technical but organizational. They were constructing doctrine, maintenance systems, and training pipelines at the same time. The first operational aircraft were propeller-driven fighters left over from the Second World War. They were already aging, but they offered range and payload sufficient for internal security missions. At the time, the country faced insurgencies in several regions. Air support became one component of a broader strategy. Missions were flown carefully, often in coordination with ground units that relied on precision and timing rather than overwhelming force. Through the early 1950s, aviation also took on a public dimension. An aerobatic team was formed to represent the Air Force at events both domestic and abroad. Their routines emphasized discipline and coordination rather than spectacle. The aircraft were the same used in operational roles, which reinforced a sense that performance and duty were closely linked. The team became a visible expression of a developing aviation culture. The arrival of jet aircraft in the late 1950s marked a significant transition. Pilots trained on propeller-driven systems had to adapt to new speeds, new aerodynamics, and new risks. Maintenance crews faced equally steep learning curves. Infrastructure had to be upgraded to support turbines, fuel systems, and more complex avionics. The base gradually evolved, reflecting a shift from a post-war force into a modernizing service. By the early 1960s, supersonic capability entered the inventory. The new aircraft were faster, more agile, and better suited to interception roles. 2 tactical squadrons were formed, each developing its own internal culture while operating under shared doctrine. Training intensified. Pilots were expected to maintain proficiency in both air-to-air and limited ground attack roles, balancing deterrence with practical mission requirements. For decades, these aircraft remained in service. Upgrades were introduced incrementally, extending their operational life. Pilots rotated through assignments that took them across the archipelago, from northern Luzon to the southern islands. The geography itself shaped operations. Long distances over water, variable weather, and dispersed airfields required careful planning. The fighter force adapted to these conditions, maintaining readiness within practical constraints. In the late 1970s, an additional type of fighter aircraft was transferred from an allied country. On paper, it offered improved range and capability. In practice, its age quickly became a limiting factor. Maintenance demands increased, and spare parts were difficult to secure. Technicians worked to keep the aircraft serviceable, but the effort was not sustainable. Within a decade, the fleet was grounded. The experience reinforced a recurring lesson about life cycle management. Acquisition alone did not guarantee capability. Without consistent access to parts, training, and technical support, even advanced systems could become liabilities. The remaining fighter fleet continued to operate, but the margin for error narrowed. Each sortie required careful consideration of aircraft condition, available resources, and mission necessity. In December 1989, during a period of political instability, the presence of operational fighters played a stabilizing role. Aircraft were prepared for deployment, and pilots stood ready. In the end, the situation de-escalated without the need for force. The episode demonstrated that capability could influence outcomes without being used. It also underscored the importance of maintaining readiness, even when direct engagement was unlikely. Through the 1990s, the fighter fleet continued to age. Budget priorities shifted toward internal security and disaster response. The country faced insurgent groups, natural disasters, and economic pressures that required immediate attention. Resources were allocated accordingly. While the Air Force remained active, investment in new fighter aircraft was delayed. Maintenance extended service life, but not indefinitely. The eruption of Mount Pinatubo in 1991 had a lasting impact on infrastructure. Ashfall damaged facilities, including those at Basa Air Base. Recovery took time and resources. Operations resumed, but the event highlighted the vulnerability of fixed installations. Planning began to incorporate resilience measures, though implementation was gradual and often constrained by funding limitations. By the early 2000s, the decision to retire the remaining fighters became unavoidable. Airframes had reached the end of their service life. Continued operation would have required disproportionate investment with diminishing returns. The choice was not between maintaining capability and losing it, but between retiring responsibly or risking operational failure. Leadership opted for controlled withdrawal. The period that followed was defined by absence. Without fighter aircraft, the Air Force relied on other platforms for its missions. Trainer aircraft were adapted for light attack roles. Helicopters supported ground operations and humanitarian efforts. These assets were effective within their intended scope, but they could not replicate the speed, altitude, and deterrence associated with fighters. During these years, regional dynamics evolved. Maritime areas in the western approaches of the archipelago became increasingly contested. Fishing vessels, Coast Guard ships, and survey operations operated in close proximity. Diplomatic channels remained active, but the absence of air-based deterrence limited response options. The situation required careful navigation between assertion and restraint. In 2012, a standoff at a disputed shoal drew international attention. The resolution did not involve direct military confrontation, but it underscored the constraints faced by a country without a modern fighter force. Observers within the defense community noted the gap. Discussions about modernization, long present, began to take on greater urgency. The decision to acquire new fighter aircraft emerged from this context. Budgetary considerations, training requirements, and maintenance capacity all influenced the selection process. The chosen platform needed to be capable but also sustainable. It had to integrate with existing systems while allowing for future growth. The acquisition was framed not as a return to past structures, but as the beginning of a new phase. Training programs were developed in parallel with procurement. Pilots who had spent years flying slower aircraft began transitioning to supersonic platforms. The process required adjustments in mindset as much as in technique. Simulators, classroom instruction, and supervised flights formed a structured pathway. The goal was not rapid conversion, but consistent proficiency built over time. In late 2015, the first of the new aircraft arrived. Their introduction marked a visible change at the airbase. Ground crews adapted to new systems, learning through hands-on experience and technical guidance. Maintenance facilities were upgraded to support the incoming fleet. The transition was gradual, with each aircraft integrated into operations only after meeting established standards. Pilots assigned to the reactivated squadron approached their new roles with measured expectations. Many had trained extensively before ever flying the aircraft in operational conditions. The first sorties focused on familiarization, navigation, and basic maneuvers. Confidence developed incrementally. There was no attempt to accelerate beyond what training and safety protocols allowed. By 2019, organizational changes reflected the growing capability. Units that had been dormant were reactivated. Names and traditions returned, but they were adapted to current realities. The emphasis remained on building a sustainable force. Leadership avoided framing the moment as a restoration of past glory. Instead, it was presented as a continuation shaped by new conditions. Joint exercises with Allied air forces provided additional experience. Pilots participated in air combat maneuvering, formation flying, and coordinated operations. These exercises were structured to emphasize learning rather than competition. Differences in aircraft performance were acknowledged openly. The focus remained on interoperability, communication, and mutual understanding. Within the squadrons, routines began to stabilize. Maintenance schedules, training cycles, and operational planning followed predictable patterns. Younger pilots entered the pipeline, learning from instructors who had experienced both the absence and return of fighter capability. This continuity helped anchor the force, ensuring that institutional knowledge was passed forward. Plans for expansion were introduced cautiously. Additional aircraft were ordered with the intention of forming a second fully operational squadron. Infrastructure improvements continued, including runway maintenance, hangar construction, and support systems. Each step was calibrated against available resources, reflecting an awareness of past constraints. By the mid-2020s, the outline of a rebuilt fighter force was visible. It was smaller than those of larger nations, but it was structured to meet specific national requirements. The emphasis remained on territorial defense, maritime awareness, and cooperative security. The force was not designed for projection beyond its immediate region, but for stability within it. Looking back, the decade without fighters is often described in practical terms rather than emotional ones. It was a period defined by limitations, but also by adaptation. The Air Force continued to operate, support, and respond within its means. The absence of one capability did not halt its broader mission, though it did shape its boundaries. Today, aircraft once again take off from Basa Air Base, accelerating into the same airspace that had been quiet for years. The routines are familiar, but the context has changed. Pilots, technicians, and planners work within a framework built from past experience. The return of fighter capability is not presented as a conclusion, but as an ongoing process shaped by time, resources, and careful decisions.